Hello everyone, today we are again in Ancast and we are with Professor Hülsmann. He is teaching actually in the University of Angers in France. He is a senior fellow in the Mises Institute, and today we are going to be talking about his book, The Ethics of Money Production. It is a very instructive book that talks about the cultural consequences of fiat money, right? Because sometimes in the economics and monetary terms, we always talk about why it's bad, why it does this and that. But this is, I think, more profound, and it goes really to the root of the problem, and it's really instructive. So thanks, Hülsmann, for being today with us.
My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, there's actually a lot of topics that I want to talk about, but first I want to ask you, why is fiat bad, and will we have a fiat money in a free market, for example?
Well, in a free market, in a purely free market economy, by definition, you wouldn't have fiat money. Fiat money is always sort of money that is imposed by political authorities on the market, now for various reasons. But on a free market, only those economic goods would be generally accepted media of exchange, which is the definition of money, which would be useful for the individuals using them. Right. So if you have the choice between, let's say, using a banknote from this or that bank, or a piece of gold, or a silver coin, or whatever else, you're weighing the advantages and inconveniences for you personally. And one big disadvantage of fiat money is that as an individual owner, you only have very limited possibility to control the characteristics of that type of money, right? Because it can be produced in unlimited quantities by the government, and as a consequence, the government has the possibility to reduce the value, the relative value of what you own overnight, or let's even from 1 hour to the other during the day. They can do this. So that's not very interesting. Right? So one important reason why we desire to own money is because it serves us as a reserve of value. And so therefore, in order to hold money for any significant length of time, or even to save in terms of money, well, we need to be sure that the purchasing power stays about the same what it is right now, or might even increase in the course of time. So that would be an interesting money from an individual point of view. And fiat money does not fit this criterion. So therefore, on a free market, people would not use something like fiat money. They might use something like Bitcoin or so. This is different, right? It's also immaterial. It's not a tangible good, and insofar it's similar to fiat money, because most of fiat money also exists in an accounting form, not in the form of paper. I mean, we are accustomed to using the banknotes, right, of the euro system, but this is only a small part of the overall money stock. The biggest part comes in an accounting form. So Bitcoin is similar in that respect, but of course the whole point of the Bitcoin system is that you are not able, and nobody is able, to extend the overall stock of Bitcoins overnight or to multiply it overnight. So in that respect, therefore, Bitcoin is much more interesting for an individual market participant than a fiat money unit.
Yes, and also this goes back to a protection of the private rights of property, right? Because inflation actually breaks with all of that, and this is the essential point, right?
Yeah, for using money, this is of course a major consideration. Yes.
And also, you say in the book that banks are not banks anymore, even though they are called banks, right? How is this?
Well, the central banks are no longer really banks.
Yeah.
Right? A bank is a financial intermediary, and so that's the essential role, right? So the traditional role. So banks receive money from other people, from some customers, and they hand over that money to other people, to other customers. So they serve as intermediaries. Now, fractional reserve banks dominate today the scene. So in fractional reserve banks, they do two things. They serve as intermediaries, but they also produce money units out of nothing, right? More exactly, what they're producing is not money proper, but money substitutes, claims on money. That's what they produce them out of nothing. So in that respect, they are similar to present-day central banks. But present-day central banks, there's no longer any intermediation at all. And so central banks are really, they resemble more an unlimited gold mine or an unlimited silver mine. Right?
Yeah.
So they're really money producers. They're not intermediaries or not banks in that sense. And they keep the name of central banks only for historical reasons, because they've emerged in the 19th century out of commercial banking. So the Banque de France was created as a commercial bank. The Bank of England was initially a commercial bank. So they operated on the same principles as all other commercial banks, which was fractional reserve banking. So you had the two roles combined, the production, ex nihilo production of money substitutes, but also financial intermediation. But in the present day world, there's no longer any financial intermediation, so they're no longer really banks.
And also, I wrote that the gold standard is not such a panacea as maybe we would think, because it didn't surge in a free market. It was put there by governments, and maybe we will have silver or other monies or competing metals, right? But because when I interview another professors about this, most of them are really like gold is everything. Huerta de Soto, for example, is all for gold. But this is an interesting perspective also, if you can develop it.
Yes, I mean, it was indeed a point that I stress in my book, and there are not many authors who do this. You're right. And I think it's very important to keep in mind that the gold standards, as we know them, were government creations, right? And it started even with the classical gold standard that emerged in the late 19th century and held up until roughly World War I, was not a system. Right? So in that respect, it's very appealing politically from a libertarian point of view, because there was no overarching organization of governments, international organization, but governments conformed to cooperating with each other based on a national gold standard system. But of course, the gold standard itself was imposed in all of these countries. It didn't emerge spontaneously in Germany. It didn't emerge spontaneously in France or in the US. In all such cases, it was imposed by the central government. And the reason is that really for daily exchanges, gold is not particularly useful. Right? Gold is always useful as a reserve asset. Right? Because you can keep large amounts of value in relative small quantities in volume and in weight. So therefore, gold is interesting as a reserve. Right? And of course, it could emerge as a medium of exchange, and it has been used as a medium of exchange in large-scale transactions, so between in professional exchanges and in international transactions. Right? But even there, so it was more of a limited role. But for most people, really, the most useful medium of exchange at all times, in all places, not only in Europe, in Asia and in the Americas, I suppose even in Africa, although I know African monetary history a little less well, was always silver. Right? So gold was never the money, the standard medium of exchange. It was imposed as a standard medium of exchange during the 19th century, first in the Anglo-Saxon countries, and then the other European countries followed one after the other. First the Germans, after they won the war against the French in 1870-71, and then the French also followed through the Scandinavian countries and so on. Most of the other countries followed as well.
Yes, so it's a weapon for government omnipotence in this sense, right? As you put it in the book, I like the radical there. Also, there is that you say that Plato proposed to outlaw gold and silver to ensure dependency on government. In his ideal city, he will just use fiat money, and it will be worthless outside the walls of the city. So it's not like we have now, but it looks really similar.
Yes.
These utopias, right?
Yes.
And also we have Bernanke, right, that he says there's no problem because we can print all the money we want, so don't worry about deflation, because all this government, all these politics have, like, they are afraid of deflation, sorry.
Yes.
And why is this?
Let me just emphasize this one point again before we get to talk about deflation.
Okay, yes.
Topic. Governments naturally evolve. If you let them evolve freely, they always try to adopt a monetary system that is most useful from their point of view. And it's a natural thing. It's unavoidable. And what is most useful for governments, it's always a monetary system that gives them the greatest amount of control, the additional degree of liberty. But of course, an additional degree of liberty for the authorities means a reduced liberty for all others, right? For the ordinary citizens. And today we have, of course, technical possibilities that we didn't have in previous times. So today it's possible to put into place a monetary system that allows governments not only to control the new units that are being floated into the system, but also all previous units that have already been created. If you imagine a monetary system that is purely digital, right? Digital central bank currency, so no more banknotes, the abolition of cash, all people would deal just with payment cards, credit cards, and so on. Then, of course, governments could control not only the new units that are being created out of nothing, they could also control all units that have already been created and that are now sitting on the bank accounts of the people. They could tell them when to use them, how to use them, which limitations. You can no longer spend money on alcohol or on prostitutes or on games. You cannot purchase more than 2 kilograms of meat per year or something like this, right? So there's is unlimited.
Negative interest rates too, right?
Yes, of course. Yeah.
This kind of things. Yeah, and now going also to the deflation, there was a big deflation, right? Inflation in the 16th and 17th century, and it was like 3%. But for that time, it was like, wow, this is crazy inflation, or the price. It was called like the revolution of price, right, or something like that. And actually, the inflation that we have, it's like crazy. Like when you wrote the book, I think it was a lot more than that. But after you wrote the book, it has been crazy, right? Since, for example, 2020. I don't know what maybe will you add to the book right now. What's in the past?
Well, yeah, I looked the figures up. Actually, I published a second edition in German. So I hope that there will be soon also an English second edition. So I updated all the figures and so on. And the figures are quite shocking if you look at this, right? So in the Eurozone, for example, since the inception of the euro, so it was 1999, the annual increase of the money stock was 10%. That's the average annual increase of the money stock. Now that's huge, right? And it is huge not only relative to the money stock, it's also huge, especially if we consider who are the main beneficiaries of this. It's always governments, especially national governments, central governments. And if you put this in relationship to their ordinary income, you arrive at astounding figures because, right, so for them, thanks to the issuance of new money, they're able to increase public debt. That has been especially important in the past 5 or 6 years in the context of the COVID policies. And so as a consequence of this, governments have been able to extend the amount of money that they can spend, and therefore the amount of resources that they can control without any political discussion. Right? That's the funny thing. Usually, if we are talking about taxation and so on, there's grinching of teeth, and people are unhappy, and you're discussing about each additional million and each additional billion that you want to spend. And here, thanks to the printing press, they can increase their spending by hundreds of billions every year, every single year. And there's no discussion around
it's like a secret tax that you really don't see.
Yes, yeah. And it's, of course, I mean, even if you're not a big fan of democracy, but I mean, the democracy is rooted, is premised on the fact that really the citizens control the government. How can they control them? Well, by validating the budget. Right? If you do not control the amount of money that the governments can use, well, you don't control the government. You just have a couple of crazy guys who have a vision that is more or less well-intended or beneficial for the collectivity, but they can do what they want, right? If there's no limitation. And that's what fiat money allows them to do.
Yeah, because when you create money, right, it favors the first one who receive the money. That will be the governments, the banks, their friends, and it goes against the last one that maybe, I don't know who will that be, but maybe people like me and you and all the rest that are watching. And also, you mentioned that the inflation doesn't always benefit the debtors, as we may think, right? Because it's always says in most of the books I read that this is what happens, but if you anticipate this, it wouldn't be that way. But do you think that this happens in most cases or in some?
That what would happen in some cases?
That because usually I thought that the debtors were also the big beneficiaries of the inflation, like the government that is the biggest debtor, the public debt and everything, and he will be really the best beneficiary of this. But in the book you say that this is not always the case because you can anticipate this.
Yes. And that's what usually what happens in such cases. Either you anticipate or you rectify after the fact, right? Either you anticipate, well, the price level next year will be lower than it is today. Well, you can agree that, well, the debtor has to pay back less money than it would have under stable purchasing power of money. That's one possibility. Then if the evolution comes as a surprise, the debt is typically renegotiated, right? So the debtor is incapable of paying back. Well, so one possibility then for the creditor is to force a liquidation, right? That's one possibility. But the creditor does not always have an incentive to do this, right? For him, very often it's useful that the debtor stays in business and continues servicing the debt, though at a lower level than before, right? So this is another possibility. But what is also important to consider is that if we had a free market monetary system and the price deflationary tendencies that follow from it, right? So this is very important, right? A natural monetary, a competitive economy is a price deflationary economy. And you see that in all the statistics that we have from the 19th century, right? For previous centuries, very difficult to obtain somewhat reliable statistics. But in the 19th century, it's very clear, right? The price deflationary tendencies are there. And in such a system, actually, there are very weak incentives for people to finance their spending with credits. People would tend to avoid credit as much as possible. Today, when we purchase an apartment, a studio, even a car, most people fund this with a credit. And that's very rational in our monetary system because as time goes by, the value of money diminishes. So you're paying back out of a higher revenue, always the same amount that you had agreed in your contract, but the burden on you is diminishing. In previous times, so in the 19th century, our grandfathers, great-grandfathers and mothers, they would not purchase anything on credit. They would first save, keep this in cash, and then eventually when they had enough money, they would purchase the good in question. Right? Now, this might look like, oh, well, but then they have to wait and it's more cumbersome and so on. But actually, it had one big advantage, namely that relative to their income, all these durable goods cost them much less than they cost today. Right? So the relation in an inflationary system, you have the tendency that assets, durable assets, grow in value faster than the average revenue. And this is very clear if we look at post-World War II statistics, right? You see this very clearly. So it means that for an average person, it takes much longer, in fact, many more years to purchase a durable asset out of your labor. That's what it means. Whereas in previous times, so the early 20th century and then the 19th century, and I suppose also the centuries that before, it took much less years of labor to purchase a house or a vehicle or whatever other durable asset you were interested in.
Yes, I think this is one of the most interesting topics because it also disrupts the morality of people, because you have to first don't save the money before you waste it, and now it's all the way around and they force you to do that. And it also, as you say, create dependency of people on the government, because you are dependent on everything. You have to pay your house. If you don't pay, they kick you out. And if it was the other way around, you will buy it in less time. You will already have it. You won't be like all this dependency that in one of your conference you say, like the trucks in Canada when the COVID thing, they had to pay their debts and everything because the people in Canada or United States don't really have savings, because it's not the logic right now with the system that we have. They also force you to invest in stocks, to be all focused around money, because it's the only alternative that you have with this crazy system.
Yes, yeah. I mean, it's also something that I tell my students all the time. I mean, why was the labor union movement so strong in the 19th century and in the early 20th century? It was because workers, by and large, well, they were benefiting from 100 years of capitalism. So the real wages had dramatically increased. But moreover, they had a sound monetary system, or much better than, not completely sound, but much better than today. So as a consequence, they had significant reserves. They had lots of money at home and on their bank accounts. They were not rich people, but relative to their needs, they had lots of cash, right? So they could go on living for weeks, sometimes even months, without asking for a credit, without asking for anything. They could do without revenue. And that's why they were able to strike. That's why they were able to oppose powerful employers and also the political authorities, because they were independently wealthy, so to say. And today, under our monetary system, nobody's doing this. Even really wealthy people, they're completely dependent on the monetary system and on the banking system. They couldn't survive for any significant amount of time without cooperation of the banks and of the political authorities. And let's not talk about ordinary people, employees, workers, and so on. It's just completely out of the question.
Right. And how this also affect the labor? Because also in one of the conference you say that the time of labor is the most scarce resource. So the inflation really affects this because you cannot stock it, or I don't know if you can develop it, or if you know what I mean with this.
Yes. In an inflationary monetary system, as in our system, durable good, you can no longer hoard money, right, as savings. So you need, if you want to build savings, you want to build wealth, you cannot do it by keeping cash. It's just irrational. So as a consequence, you need to purchase something that keeps its value across time, or even appreciates in value across time. So necessarily in an inflationary system, therefore, durable goods come at a premium. Right? There's an extra demand is addressed to them because people are looking for a substitute for money, substitute for sound money. So therefore, they are purchasing real estate and they're purchasing shares of companies, especially companies listed on the stock market. As a consequence, the prices of these goods, of real estate and of shares, tends to increase faster than the average revenue, right? Because people put a premium on these things. And then, of course, you get some sort of a snowball movement going, right, which can be highly problematic and lead to financial crisis if this movement becomes too fast, right? It can overheat, and so then the valuations become too high, then it will collapse. But this doesn't change anything to the trend, right? So you get ups and down cycles and crises and so on. But the trend is important, and the trend is always upward, right? That you purchase real estate and shares as substitutes for money, and therefore you're ready to pay higher prices than you would pay for them, only in light of the ordinary criteria, right? What the use of the house would be for you personally, and so on. Now, on the other hand, in an inflationary monetary system, those goods that only have short-run validity, they come at a discount because they do not help you to preserve value across time. And human labor is the good that is the most short-run good of all goods, because labor by definition can only be provided, but it cannot be stored, it cannot be stocked. As a consequence, in an inflationary system, labor comes at a discount. Right? So therefore, you get a fundamental shift in the valuations of labor, which is a short-run good or the immediate good, as compared to durable goods. And the more durable they are, well, the higher tends to be the value preservation premium.
So it looks like we're getting like to be more like slaves each time, because our time, that is the most precious thing that we have, is less valuable compared to all other things, right?
Yes, it's true. And again, that would be different if you have a free market economy. In a free market economy, you get a price deflationary tendency, because people would tend to select those monies that best preserve their purchasing power, or that even increase in purchasing power. So in a free market, you always get the selection of those types of monies that the quantity of which grows less rapidly than the quantities of all other goods. As a consequence, you get this price deflationary tendency. And this, in analogy to what I explained before, of course, creates a discount on durable goods, right? If you're accumulating very easily and prices are diminishing anywhere, well, I mean, you don't have any particular reason to purchase real estate or to purchase shares of companies. You no longer need a substitute for money. If you just want to live an easy life, you just hoard some cash, and that's it. It's not a big problem. Right? So you're not dependent on real estate and on any investment, on any speculation whatsoever, in order to preserve your assets. Right? As a consequence, therefore, the relative value of your labor services increases as compared to all these other goods. It increases relative to real estate, increases relative to shares, increases relative to all other things, also to food and so on. And that's what we saw in the 19th century.
So the root evil of the fiat system goes to the morals of the people also.
Goes to the more, yes. Well, I mean, these valuations, right? That's part of the moral setup. But then, of course, you get other moral problems as well that are more fundamental.
Yeah.
Which, in particular, what I stress in my book is the problem of moral hazard. Right. So the incentive to behave in ways that are particularly destructive or risky or wasteful. Because you expect that other people would foot at least part of the bill. So it's not yourself, you're entirely responsible, but others will be partly responsible. And in fact, the printing press is a way to have other people pay for the errors that highly indebted investors make. And that's the most glaring example is the banking system. Right? If you look at banks, banks have virtually no capital. Right? The owners of banks, they are controlling the banks, they're making all the decisions with 5% of the capital or less invested. right? And all the rest of the money comes out of credit, essentially credit coming from the printing press of central banks and so on, right? And then the money creation by the commercial banks themselves. So as a consequence, these banks have an incentive to make investments that are risky, that could very well turn sour, but they themselves, they're in there only with 5%. It's not much. Moreover, they know that it will not come to the situation in which they go bankrupt because the political authorities want to avoid at any price that they go bankrupt. So they will always help them out. So they can really do with their money what they wish. There's no more responsibility. And this reverberates throughout the system. It affects a financial decision. It affects human resource policies, right? The kind of people that you hire and so on. It affects the sort of investments that you make and all these other things.
Right. Also, as you said, there's no entrepreneurs. They are more like managers.
Yeah, I mean, if we look at startups today, very often funded entirely out of either subsidies coming from governments and or bank credit. Well, in that case, clearly the young person who sets up such a startup and is funded by 90% out of a bank credit or out of a public subsidy, he's not an entrepreneur. I mean, we call him an entrepreneur in order to flatter him, and because governments want to encourage that sort of behavior, because these people are also paying taxes, right? So they want to have people doing this. So therefore, they flatter them, but they're not really entrepreneurs. They don't decide anything on their own. They're executing a plan that they might have invented, but the plan would never have come to execution unless it were for the subsidy and or for the credit that's been given by the bank. So really, the people who are running the show are the governments and the banks.
Yeah, so they can also decide in what you can investigate, in what needs to be developed, in the technology that they want, and also in the monetary theory, right? We have also inflation because maybe they be like, well, this actually benefits us, so we will bring these intellectuals that maybe we just pay them good, maybe they believe in what they are saying, it may be that, but I think it's really more serious, the Austrian school thought about this case, but it's not really good for the government.
Yes, that's the main explanation in very few words that you have just given of the unpopularity of Austrian economics with governments. And it was the same with classical economics, right? In 1800, no government liked the ideas of Adam Smith. So it was always something that came to be applied a bit grudgingly, right? So people didn't really like this idea.
Right. And also, we talk about the CBDCs a little, the Bitcoin. What will you see? I don't know if you put in the next edition of your book where this is going, because there's some people talking about a new Bretton Woods system. Do you think the dollar is going down, or it's going to be a change around the desmaterialization of money? Where do you think we are going?
Yeah, it's a very interesting period that we are going through. All kinds of things are possible. It's very difficult to foresee the future there clearly, but it is possible that the dollar lose its status as the international reserve currency. It is possible. And especially in the light of the military confrontations in Ukraine and Iran. So if the US loses its ability to impose its will militarily on other nations, then it also loses the ability to impose the dollar on other nations. And this has always been a major concern of the Americans, right? The first thing that they did 15 years ago, when there was the invasion of Libya and the dictator was ousted, Gaddafi, first thing the Americans did was to set up a central bank. Right?
Very Western.
Very first thing that happens is Libya needs to have a central bank finally. Right? So they're always very concerned. They're not talking about it. Of course, you should never talk about this because it would be a sign of weakness. But of course, in practice, if you look at their actions, what they're doing, they're always very concerned about the demand for dollars. We want to make sure that there is sufficient demand for dollars from other nations. Now, in Europe, they have a home run because Western Europe is a very highly economic developed area of the world. And it's politically and militarily completely dependent on the Americans. So the Americans can just do with Western Europe what they wish. It's their own turf, right? They can, and the Europeans go along with it. I mean, there's no alternative for them. But then these are also not the areas where you have the highest economic growth, right? Growth is very sluggish in Western Europe. It's also not particularly high in the US, although it's better than in Europe. But the most dynamic areas of the world are elsewhere. And if the US doesn't manage to impose the US dollars on these areas in Central Asia, Southeast Asia, and so on, well, then it's only a question of time until people are looking elsewhere. So that's the fundamental issue. But then there are also other things that have happened recently. You mentioned the conflict around the COVID policies with the Canadian truckers. We should also think of the conflict around Ukraine and the economic and financial sanctions that have been imposed on Russia. Now, if you are freezing the bank accounts of a foreign government, right, then in fact you are destroying the trust that other people can have in your monetary and financial system. Mm-hmm. People were holding dollar accounts because they thought, okay, whatever may come, but we will still be able to use that money and these assets in the Western Hemisphere because there was a general respect for the rule of law in the Western Hemisphere. Right? Now the Americans have destroyed all of this and the Western Europeans with them. And we're freezing this. All things are good against an enemy who's doing such brutal things as Mr. Putin and his Russian government have done. So we have the right to resort to all kinds of things that is really limitless. Now, clearly the trust of the Russians in the Western willingness to honor contractual engagement has been destroyed. But of course, all others are looking at this and saying, okay, I might be the next in line. So why should I hold any significant amount of money at an American bank or with the American central bank? And we see the answer to this question in the statistics. So in the past 3 years, ever since the outbreak of the Ukraine war, governments all over the world, respectively their central banks, have shifted massively their reserves out of the dollar and into gold. Right? I mean, next to the dollar, there's really no other meaningful alternative in terms of a payment system and of a financial system. The Chinese don't have anything comparable. The Russians don't have anything comparable. They're working on something of this sort. Maybe it will be there, but presently it's not yet there. Maybe it's different in 5 years or 10 years. So currently, the main alternative is to own a lot of gold. And that's what central banks all over the world have done. And as a consequence, the gold price has gone through the roof. And it's probably not yet at the end.
Right.
And similar for Bitcoin. Bitcoin is a bit more speculative. Moreover, there is the question, there are also technical issues, right? Bitcoin is, in a way, is easier to control for people who control the internet. People who control the internet also control Bitcoin. But you can have all control over the internet that you wish. You will never be able to control gold, right? Because it's a physical asset. It's removed from the internet. Now, some very technically astute people, they may also use Bitcoin without relying on the internet. They have their Bitcoin keys on a USB stick or something like this, so you don't really need it. But I mean, as a medium of exchange, there's no way to exchange Bitcoins unless you have something like a Bitcoin, like an internet. and the internet can be controlled. And so that's the Achilles heel of the Bitcoin system. Right? It's still quite America-centric, and in that respect, less interesting from a political perspective than precious metals.
Yes, I think like you in this point, because in Bitcoin you always need an intermediary. And for example, in Spain, a little ago, all the lights went out. So you see that if you're using Bitcoin, it will be difficult, right? If you have gold or silver, you always have it. You can move it around with no much problem. But yeah, in this case, Bitcoin also looks like the good narrative against the CBDCs, but it can be also used as against the people that want more liberty, more or less, because the government really controls the law, the internet, and all these things. So it is not maybe as good as the people that are all pro Bitcoin put it. Even though we like it in the sense that it goes against the government, and it's a good idea in that sense.
Correct.
And I don't know if you want to add something on it, or we can pass to the next question.
Yeah, we can. Let's move to the next question.
Okay, great. And also in your book, you mentioned another thing that I think it's really interesting from a libertarian point of view, because obviously for a libertarian, one of the most important things is the respect of private property, because all the rights and everything goes in around this thing. But also the most important thing is the lives of the people, is the war. And what fiat inflation does is that it can do that the war get longer. Like you mentioned the First World War, for example, the Second World War, and it could have saved millions of lives to don't have this kind of control over the monetary system. And I think this is a very good point and is not really talked about.
Yeah, correct. I mean, at the beginning of World War I, there was a lot of enthusiasm on all sides. The Germans were happy to go to war. The French were happy to go to war. The English were happy to go to war. The Russians were happy to go to war. So everybody was healthy, rich, and they liked to demonstrate their commitment to patriotism. Right?
Mhm.
So you cannot avoid such things. I mean, sometimes people fall prey to a national frenzy and they just become violent and so on. Okay. But then the good thing is that usually war gets ugly very quick, and it's not just a smash and a home run and you're over with it within a few days or a few weeks. I mean, there have been wars of this sort, but it's the exception. Usually it goes on and then lots of people die. And if your friends die, if your brothers die, and so on, or get maimed and so on, well, I mean, you tend to lose your enthusiasm rather quick. Right? So I can tell you by 1916, very few people were really left that were really enthusiastic about the war as they had been in August 1914. And then the natural thing that happens next is that people just go tired and say, okay, this is not moving left and right. I mean, we're not making any significant progress. Let's just cut a deal and make peace and go home. And that's usually what happens. Now, thanks to, in order to go on, you would have to increase the funding. So people would not be happy to this, and they would certainly not be happy to step up to increase the war effort, right? So they would rather cut it down. Now, what fiat money allows governments to do is to step up the funding of the war at the very moment when psychologically it becomes least popular. And that's what they have done. So you go on and you step up the war effort, you bring in new machines, more destructive stuff, and so on. People are exhausted. And then you try to rush an end. You throw people at the front, throw them into machine gun fire, and so on. And that's what we had massively in 1917 and 1918. So the highest losses were at the end of the war. And without the printing press, without the funding of the war out of this enormous facility, it would not have been possible.
Yes, so it's really a bad consequence also of fiat money that is not really talked about. And also, what do you think of the fractional reserve? Because in Spain, there's a kind of debate between more or less Austrian school. I don't know if it's also maybe in France or in the United States, about fractional reserve against 100% gold reserve. Well, I don't know in English exactly the name, but you know what I mean, right?
Yes, yeah. I mean,
is the debate there too? Or?
Yes. I mean, this debate is very old, right?
Right,
And the earliest literary trace that we have, so the earliest documents of this sort, were within the school of Salamanca in Spain. So you had the Dominicans on the one hand, and the Jesuits. The Dominicans, not all of them, but most of them, tended to be pro 100% reserves, and the Jesuits tended to be in the majority for fractional reserve thinking, right? So it started off there, and you have the same opposition in all countries and at all times. It's always it's a perennial debate, and I think it will always stay that way. So I'm pro 100% reserves, and well, several of my friends are pro fractional reserve and so on. And so I think they're wrong, but right. So it's not something that you only have in Spain. It's more. I think the debate is more vigorous right now in Spain than in other countries. In France, there's not much public interest for these questions at all. So more the narrow group of Austrian economists, but there's no wider discussion. But it always pops up, and it's not limited to Austrian economics. You had always mainstream economists, for example, the French Nobel Prize winner Maurice Allais. He was a proponent of 100% reserves. So he opposed the standard banking system, monetary system in that respect. And Gary Becker as well, and various other prominent economists. Today, there are some economists working for the IMF who oppose 100% fractional reserves. They are pro 100% reserves. So it runs across the schools of thought, right? It's not just Austrian economics, but it's all other sensibilities as well. And even within Keynesian economics, people are very strongly shaped by Keynesian economics. Many of them think that commercial banks should not produce money. So they should not have the right to produce money out of nothing. So only central banks should be able to do it, which was also the position of Maurice Allais.
Right. We talked good before on Adam Smith. Now he also was for the fractional reserve, right?
Yes, he was.
One in Spain we say una de cal, otra de arena, like one good, one bad. Okay. And also, I want to ask you, what do you think about the Argentina politic Milei, that he's been elected president no long time ago? And I don't know if you are looking at the Argentina politics or economics, or if you have an opinion about Milei. Because in Spain, it's a topic that we really talk about because it's also our same language, and he likes Huerta de Soto and this. So
let me say the following. I mean, the election of Xavier Milei is a great sign of hope, because it shows that you can rally a majority of a population, especially of a country that has been tortured by government interventionism, the welfare state, for decades. That you can mobilize, that you can create a majority of the population in favor of a radical libertarian reform program. That's what he has shown. That's an incredible service. And I think he has also done lots of good things in order to put into practice his program. Okay, after what I've seen. Now, second point I would like to make is that I cannot really I don't have a good sense of the situation, because I spent no time following the debate, which is essentially in Spanish. My Spanish is too weak in order to really follow this, and plus I would need to have the figures from the Ministry of Finance and so on. I've never taken the time to look it up, but I think the situation will become clearer. He's now in power. He's been in power for 18 months or so. This is not much, really. It's not a meaningful time frame to evaluate the success of economic policies. So we have to wait a little bit longer, 2 years, 3 years, something like this. And I'm eager to see the figures coming out of this. The third point I would make is that Xavier Milei, in spite of his enthusiastic endorsement of Austrian economics, probably is not really an Austrian economist. I mean, what I've seen from him is statements on the monetary system and the nature of money and what central banks do and how central bank money is backed up by other things and so on, is certainly not a reflection of the ideas that we find in Mises or in Rothbard or even in Karl Menger. Of course, he's a politician. He needs to make compromises. I understand that, even though he has a very strong political mandate, right, from his electorate. So it's clear that it cannot be 100% libertarian, foolproof, and Austrian Misesian minimal state program and so on. It's probably difficult to do in the first thing. Yeah. But of course, I mean, there is this all of these economic issues on which he has not been perfect, but maybe excusable. But we are waiting to see the results. But on the other hand, there is also his foreign policy, which I find personally quite disastrous. So I would not agree at all with them personally, but then also they're clearly not libertarian, right? His endorsement of Zionist policies, I mean, it's also his personal, I think he converted to Judaism. So it's interwoven with his personal history and so on. I understand that also his strongest financial backers came out of the Jewish community in Argentina. So there is a very strong commitment to this. Unfortunately, apparently not to Judaism, but to Zionism, which is the nationalist variant of Judaism, and that's unfortunately it's just because it's the opposite of libertarianism, right? Yeah. There's no policy to seek peaceful settlement and solution and so on based on property rights and so on. There is a constant, quite aggressive movement of expansion, right, of national expansion at the expense of people around you. And the Prime Minister of Israel, Netanyahu, he has announced that his plans, to expand Greater Israel into the neighboring countries. I mean, that's not a libertarian program. I mean, you can say what you wish. And then he has also, of course, endorsed the foreign policy by Trump. He's endorsed Zelensky's policies against Russia and so on, which were also quite aggressive. And let's not forget that was the origin of that conflict, right? Because Zelensky signed the Minsk Accords, but neither he nor Hollande, the Hollande government, not the Merkel government, were willing really to respect the engagements that they signed, and they admitted so publicly, to my great astonishment. But they did so. So Javier Milei is not libertarian on all of these issues. It's quite the opposite of libertarian.
Neocon, maybe.
Yes, right. So I mean, he's a human being. He has done many good things, so maybe we should look especially on the things that he did well and forgive him other things that he didn't do well. But I can tell you, there are quite a few things that he didn't do well.
Yeah, and also
certainly from
a libertarian. Yeah, because foreign policy is one of the most important things also, and as we told before the war, supporting this, I always want to get really away from this in the sense that to say, okay, I'm libertarian, I like the maybe economic things, even though he can be, I don't know, maybe more Chicago, you see his classes all with these graphs and everything, and I think he likes Austrian economics, but maybe he didn't really incorporate it to his knowledge that he had before. Yes, from the libertarian point of view, the Zionism position is not good. And also,
internally, right? I mean, he has created a movement toward the reinforcement of the central government, right? Police state, cracking down on demonstrations and so on. I mean, I mean, call this what you wish, but that's not really a libertarian policy, right? But the libertarian policy would be to reduce the competence of the central government, give the most as much autonomy as possible to the community level, municipality, and so on. Strengthen all of this, strengthen the grassroots, let people settle their own problems, solve their own problems, and find their own compromises. That would be a libertarian policy.
I wanted to ask you because I think in Spain there's a kind of, even through the most libertarian and the people that have been the longest in this, I don't think it's a crazy support that they don't even distantiate in these kind of things. And it looks bad from my point of view that they don't say, okay, this is good, but wait a minute. So yeah, I want to know the perspective maybe from outside. We have here. Also, I wanted to ask you, what do you think about the Spanish Austrian school? Because I think that maybe after the United States, correct me if I'm wrong, that Spain is one of the places where these ideas are getting the most people.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that is also my impression. And again, I don't spend much time in Spain, but for my visits in the course of the years, I mean, that is the impression that I've received. And of course, most of this is due to the enormous activity and the enormous impact of Jesus Huerta de Soto, not only as an author and as a professor, but through his personality, through his incredible dynamic personalities, his positive attitude and his enthusiasm. So he has really created a movement. I can only hope that once he retires or he's run over by a train, which I don't wish, but I mean, he's mortal, so at some point he will no longer be there. I hope that the movement will be vital enough to keep going, even though he's no longer there. So, and it has reverberated far beyond the boundaries of Spain and into all of Latin America and other parts of the world. Then also thanks to the English translation of his books, which now become more and more available through Palgrave Macmillan in London, and the good editorial work by David Howden and Philip Bargos. So yes, I'm very happy for this success, and therefore I must say also I'm a bit fearful, right? Because my good friend Jesus, he has very strongly endorsed Milei. So I wonder whether he's not risking too much of his legacy by putting so much money on one horse. But right, so he is probably better able to judge these things than I myself. We're much more at a distance, and he knows better the cultural context of Argentina and the situation and so on. But as far as he himself is concerned, Jesus Huerta, and then of his disciples, some of whom I've already mentioned, and there's also Gabriel Casada, who was a very important multiplier. He created the Instituto Juan de Mariana. And there's a whole group of people who are carrying this work forward today. I mean, this is just amazing. It's amazing work. And I only hope that, you people in Spain can keep it up this way. And you are also a fruit of this, a long-term fruit, and develop it further and bring it out to the rest of the world, as you have done in the past.
Yes, well, thank you, Professor Hülsmann. It's been a great talk. You have the book in the description in case you want to look at it. It's really great. I think I need to read it again to kind of get these ideas more, because you don't really see them in the rest of the books. So thanks, Professor, and I hope to see you again.
Thank you very much, sir. It was a pleasure talking to you.